Yeah. Okay, Elton, maybe you can make a start with your third part.
Okay. This part, I think, will be easier to follow, partly because it doesn't quote so much from the Secret Doctrine. On your screen, you see a lovely picture of in the white, the 6 Pāramitās there, and the 7th in the middle, Prajna in the black, intuitive wisdom. And that's what we're going to be talking about. HPB dedicated the Secret Doctrine to all true Theosophists everywhere, where they called it forth. Human aspiration called forth this unequaled work. And since true Theosophists exist at many levels of spiritual awareness, that text is written to be read at many levels. Since spiritual growth is possible for each individual, how the Secret Doctrine is read and understood will change over time for each one. Hence the need to remember to remain open and fluid in one's thinking, never clinging even to the most luminous insight, so that one does not get stuck at some level of understanding, no matter how lofty. All truth can be expressed in thought, that can be expressed in thought, or even direct awareness, is relative. The absolute truth is, to put it simply, unthinkable. The voice of the silence is simply dedicated to the few. While anyone may read the text and see the magnificent vista and possibilities for human beings, the text is aimed at the few. Who are these few? One immediately senses that the few are those who truly aspire to tread the path that leads to the universal goal indicated in the text. In the dedication, we are warned that even among those who think they aspire to such an end, only a few truly do so. Why? We find the answer in the voice. Just as the proem in the Secret Doctrine immediately shows what is to be unfolded, the voice sets out the broad features of the path in the first few pages. One can see that aspiration without steady determination is not enough to even get started. The reader is not coddled in any way, for the path requires the whole of one's effort, one's energy, one's attention, and a willingness to sacrifice and suffer. That suffering is Maya, of course, but so long as one's consciousness is immersed in that Maya, everything experienced will be experienced as quite real. The very first sentence sets the stage. These instructions are for those ignorant of the dangers of the lower iti. Once again, the footnote to this sentence speaks volumes. These cities are, quote, the lower, coarse, psychic, and mental energies. There are higher cities, but HPB quotes the Bhagavad Gita as saying that only one who has subdued the senses and concentrated his mind in Krishna can be served by them. So right at the start, we are told that the content of the voice is for those who are ignorant of the powers latent in the human being. Ignorance is of many kinds. There is the ignorance that we have when we do not know something and are aware of that. There is the ignorance of what we think we know when we do not know. And there is the ignorance of being ignorant even of what we do not know. Yet, as HPB and William Quan Judge tell us, we may know more than we think we know, having lived innumerable lives and doubtlessly gone through spiritual training many times. Such knowledge can be awakened by our resolve to shed our proclivities and learn from the wise. We are not to be discouraged in acknowledging our ignorance, Rather, we should refrain from attempting to judge precisely the nature of our ignorance and instead be ready to learn. As we learn, our ignorance will become increasingly obvious, and we will discover our hidden knowledge and will begin to discern what we need to do to dispel our ignorance. We are immediately told that if we are to hear the voice in the spiritual sound, we must learn the nature of dharana, which is, quote, the intense and perfect concentration of the mind upon some one interior object, accompanied by complete abstraction from everything pertaining to the external universe or the world of the senses. We likely know where we stand in regard to perfect concentration and abstraction from the world of the senses. Then immediately we are told to seek out the Raja of the senses, the very controlling source of senses, the thought producer, for it awakes illusion. The mind is the slayer of the real, and we must slay the slayer. This potent statement shows us that consciousness exists at many levels, and there are sensations at all those levels, and these must all be slain. The immediate implication of these statements is given, quote, when to himself his form appears unreal, as do on waking all the forms he sees in dreams. How many of us can see our form, physical, emotional, psychic, mental, this way? It is only when we cease to hear the many that we can discern the one, and we can leave the region of asat, the false, and enter the realm of sat, the true. It is only by uniting the soul with the silent speaker that we will hear the ultimate voice, the voice of the silence. In a nutshell, here's what we must do. But what this means and how to do it is unfurled in the following pages. We are given 3 warnings. If the soul sings in its incarnated body, like unto a chrysalis, which is the vehicle in which the lowly caterpillar is transformed into the beautiful butterfly, or if it weeps in this vehicle, or seeks to break the antascaronic thread linking it to the higher self, the soul is of the earth. But if it withdraws from the din and suffering of the world into itself, it is unworthy. And if it reaches out into space and says, this is I, it is caught in Mahamaya, the great illusion. What we are in fact lies beyond the diversity of manifestation, and right here we are told of the ways we can miss the path of real knowledge. The path avoids immersion and withdrawal, for the bodhisattva is engaged and yet apart. The bodhisattva is in the world, but not of the world, to borrow the words of the initiate Jesus. After these warnings, we are told that our earthly incarnation is the hall of sorrow, the situation of those ignorant of what the human being is in reality. Put in general terms, if we are to know all self, we have to give up self to non-self, being to non-being. Only then can we rest within the Om throughout eternal ages. Already we are taught that our personalities are utter illusions, and even our individualities fall short of real truth. The whole path is put in terms of the analogy of 3 halls. The hall of suffering is the hall of ignorance, and we recall that these instructions are for the ignorant. We must leave it and move through the hall of learning. And here there are powerful distractions, alluring flowers under which serpents coil. These are the astral powers of the astral regions, supersensuous perceptions, and deceptive sights, all part of the great illusion, Maha Maya. These are all those lower psychic powers that lie latent in the human being, and even the higher ones if not developed with right understanding. If we successfully pass through that hall, we come to the hall of wisdom, which is not described here. Beyond this hall, quote, stretch the shoreless waters of Akshara, the indestructible fount of omniscience. Note that Akshara is not given a limit, suggesting that it spreads out to infinity, beyond incarnate mental comprehension. To fill out the picture, we are provided with a musical analogy. We have to hear the mystic sounds of the higher self in 6 ways, and then we must discard them, which means discarding the personality and even our individuality, which we can take as buddhimanas, and lay them at the master's feet, for the 7th sound swallows all the others, and they are no longer heard. The master is within each of us, and is without as well, beyond our conventional conceptions, though invariably helpful when needed. When this transformation into our true being occurs, we are merged into the one, Atma, and we live in it. Here is the first reference that points us toward the one life. The language of violence appears throughout the voice, and one may be a little taken aback by that. We are told to destroy the personality, to slay the lunar form, to crush out the personality, kill desire, and so on. But if the kingdom of heaven is taken by violence, as Jesus taught, it means that we must have conquered what has seemed to conquer our real nature. We all know people who deeply identify with their possessions. In America, some so identify with their automobiles that they are personally hurt if their cars are dented or scratched. But most of us think of cars as modes of transportation, put aside in the garage when not needed for traveling between 2 places. We are to do the same with our personality, our persona or mask, for that is what it is, and even our individuality. This reorientation means not identifying with them, but rather using them instrumentally to serve some purpose and setting them aside when not needed. For many of us, achieving such a condition is painful, even violent, since we cling so desperately to I as distinct from you. We are then given a picture of what must be done to enter the path, to get going spiritually, so to say. Just as we are not to cling to what is not really us, so we are not to withdraw from the world. We are to hear and respond to every cry of pain in others, but be immune to those of ourselves. Why? Because diverse as we all are, what we are in reality is one. Until we think and act as if this is the reality, we are not on the path, though we may aspire to it. For, we're told, thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become that path itself. We become what we determinedly aspire to, and anything less than the one life is myopic in relation to it. We are given instructions to begin and tread the path, which is ourself, both for subduing the personality and for transcending the individuality, only to find that there are 2 paths. One path leads to nirvana, which the Mahachohan called an exalted selfishness. Here the sense of a separate self has not wholly been eradicated at the highest levels of consciousness. In following this path, one has failed to understand that one at every level is not separate from all others. The second path leads to the realization of the Bodhisattva ideal, and this ideal is what the Pāramitas aim for. The Pāramitā path is the path that leads us beyond our transitory myopic selves, through our individuality, toward the one life, which we ultimately are. It is sometimes called the Bodhisattva path that moves the Bodhisattva, with a small b, indicating a serious aspirant, toward becoming a true Bodhisattva, with a capital B, one who lives in Maya only for the sake of all beings. The path can be seen as a dynamic program of self-transformation, dissolving illusion and unveiling our real nature. Here, one might borrow an analogy from Sri Shankaracharya and say it is the way to remove the clouds so that the spiritual sun might shine through. Though perspectives on the path may vary, all characterize the same path, which can be pointed to, but must be oneself to be tread. As the Buddha taught, all our understanding is but a raft that carries us to the other shore, where mere understanding is set aside for realization. We are told at some length in fragment 2 of the voice what is involved in beginning to tread the path, for which we recall is ourselves, and then we are given the powerful, if blunt, summary statement. To live to benefit mankind is the first step. To practice the 6 glorious virtues is the second. The first step is a renunciation of gaining anything for oneself, though, as the light on the path tells us, we must work as those who are ambitious for themselves. This first step heralds the last step. To reach nirvana's bliss, but to renounce it, is the supreme, the final step, the highest on renunciation's path. These glorious virtues are the 6 Pāramitās, named in numerous Buddhist texts and treated rather differently in the voice. We're also immediately warned that this secret path may be too high-winged for us. Each of us has to decide that for herself or himself. If it is, follow the I doctrine, the exoteric path set out in exoteric texts. But if determined, and no one is denied the opportunity to pursue the secret path, one may attempt to tread it to the luminous end. The Pāramitās are not listed here at this point, though they are implied in the text that follows. When they are set out in fragment 3, they are symbolized as portals and characterized there. Since each disciple is the path itself, these portals are profound transition points in the disciple's nature. A Pāramitā, literally that which carries one beyond what one thought one was, is a virtue that transforms consciousness, perception, and relation to the so-called external world. The portals are not named, but the Pāramitās are called the golden keys to open each portal's gate, which is what blocks an aspirant's advance, the samskaras and skandhas that are discussed elsewhere in HPB's writings. Dana is the key of charity and love immortal. Literally, dana means giving. Immediately we see that dana is to be understood at many levels. It includes serving others by giving, but love immortal implies much more. It suggests a universal love that is no mere emotion, but rather an identification with all existence, even while acknowledging its maya. Such love reaches beyond appearances and is unconditional, not being affected by what others say and do, for better or worse. It is selfless. One translation might be magnanimity. All this, of course, can be done from the standpoint of the personality. But imagine this virtue, this strength, since virtue comes from vis, the Latin for strength, or even force, becoming one's nature. Here, one is generous, not because one is following some moral precept, but rather because it is just what one is and what one does. As a key, its full realization leads one across a portal where one does not follow a precept, but becomes the precept itself. Shila, exoterically, morality or ethics, is conduct. The key of harmony in word and act, balancing cause and effect so that there is no further room for karmic action. What a lofty view of ethics. One becomes the balance. On the way to achieving this state, it means thinking and acting with integrity and that integrity is rooted in and expresses universal unity and causation. Kshanti, patience sweet that naught can ruffle, is the ability to remain unaffected by the ups and downs of incarnate existence, essential to living for others. We are reminded here that the way to final freedom is within thyself, and that way begins and ends outside of self, the small s, the self that is personal, individual, and separate from other so-called selves. We recall that earlier we were told, both action and inaction may find room in thee, thy body agitated, thy mind tranquil, thy soul is limpid as a mountain lake. Becoming Kshanti, one is patient within and without, patient with others who are struggling in their own ways with the issues of life, and patient with oneself, which has much to conquer. And here HPB introduces a portal not listed among the exoteric 6 glorious virtues, viraga, indifference to pleasure and to pain, illusion conquered, truth alone perceived. One reason for this addition is that in exoteric Buddhist discussions of patience, this indifference is included in the idea of withstanding the turmoil of the world. B.P. Wadhya, in a letter to an aspirant, said that viraga is the fulcrum that underlies all the virtues, and HPB places it here in the very center of the 6 portals. We can begin to see that all the virtues are within each virtue as resonances that are preparatory to full realization. That is, to using the golden keys to cross each threshold. Imagine so assimilating viraga that one is now naturally indifferent to both pleasure and to pain. One knows both, of course, but is no longer distracted by pleasure or disturbed by pain. One is ready to be entirely focused on the task at hand, serving mankind and becoming a bodhisattva, a selfless being that discerns the needs of others and meets them perfectly within the bounds of karma. The second 3 Pāramitas require our deepest understanding to grasp their meanings. Dauntless energy that fights its way to the supernal truth out of the mire of lies terrestrial. Here is total focus on truth and reality, without distraction or even secondary concerns. Dhyana, the 6th golden key, opens a gate that leads one toward the realm of eternal and its ceaseless contemplation. It is difficult for us to get a sense of being an adept whose consciousness is in such ceaseless contemplation, even as he or she attends to what is needed by humanity. We typically meditate for periods of time and think, perhaps often every day, about Theosophical, but the adept is always in that condition, no matter what is going on around her or him. Finally, prajna is the key that makes of a man a god, creating him a bodhisattva, son of the dhyanis. This is the wisdom that the path which is oneself comes to, the shoreless waters of Akshara, the truth that is all beings. But immediately we're reminded that before we can approach this ultimate realization, we must master the Pāramitas, the virtues transcendental 6 and 10 in number. This is the second time the 6 and 10 are mentioned in the voice, and the unnamed Pāramitas are not given. Why? Perhaps the reason for not explaining these unnamed Pāramitas was given right at the beginning, when we were told that these instructions are for those ignorant of the lower iti. Exoteric Buddhist texts list them as upaya, skillful means, pranidhana, perfection of the bodhisattvic vow, bala, perfection of spiritual power, and jnana, perfection of knowledge. That knowledge which is being itself. Mastering these requires mastering the 6 and passing the 7 portals, and one who has not done so cannot possess any of these, even though one will find echoes of them in the effort to master the 6. And it may be that the esoteric meaning of these last paramitas can only be understood through initiation. In any case, the voice does not explain them. Pāramitā path is the way to realization of what we are, and it shows that to gain that realization, we must aspire to it and become the path. The end is in the beginning, as the oak tree is in the acorn. The Bodhisattva does not escape the world, but renounces the possibility of escape only to don the veils of myopic manifestation in order to serve others. The Bodhisattva realizes the one life, the truth, Sat, and thus understands all the levels of consciousness and existence below that masks a necessary involution and evolution for this realization. The path seems long and hard, requiring reincarnations to even enter it, and requiring that we give up everything personal and ultimately everything individual. Yet what is given up is Maya at every level. What is a sacrifice for the aspirant, and the voice indicates the many sacrifices that must be made on this path, will, when passed, be seen as no sacrifice, but as approaches to the bliss of the undisturbed one life itself. Then the Bodhisattva makes the much greater sacrifice of stepping back from merging with the one life, so that he or she, being quite beyond identification with gender, can serve suffering, struggling humanity. What more joyous possibility could there be? The one life resonates, no matter how dimly, within us, and we are invited to seek it out. For that which is uncreate abides in thee, and the light from the one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the first. We conclude with a famous quotation from the Secret Doctrine. Starting upon the long journey immaculate, descending more and more into sinful matter, and having connected himself with every atom in manifested space, the pilgrim, having struggled through and suffered in every form of life and being, is only at the bottom of the valley of matter and half through his cycle when he has identified himself with collective humanity. This he has made in his own image. In order to progress upwards and homeward, the God has now to ascend the weary uphill path of the Golgotha of life. It is a martyrdom of self-conscious existence. Like Vishvakarman, he has to sacrifice himself to himself in order to redeem all creatures, to resurrect from the many into the one life. Then he ascends into heaven indeed, where plunged into the incomprehensible absolute being and bliss of Parinirvana, he reigns unconditionally, and whence he will redescend again at the next coming, which one portion of humanity expects in its dead letter as the second advent, and the other as the last Kalki avatar. We have been given this great teaching by those who know through HPB and her colleagues. May we use it well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elton. We will have a break for 3 minutes. Then we will address the questions, and then we will round off and prepare for next Sunday. Okay, Erwin, are there questions?
Yes. Someone says, a quote from Robert Crosby says, "Mankind sins, grieves, suffers, and dies thousands of deaths. Because of what? Just ignorance." End of quote. What can students of Theosophy do to reduce this ignorance through the Pāramitās in a practical sense, when we consider the huge problems in the world, think of the wars being fought right now. How do we translate them into everyday practice when we maybe can't speak directly about the Pāramitās? So also refers to how to discuss that with others, I guess, who are not familiar. Can you say something about it?
Well, one of the things that turmoil in the world, human turmoil, allows one to do. It's easy to have a tendency, and we see it in the world, when there are conflicting forces, like in the Ukraine and like in the Middle East, to take sides. Because one is sympathetic to the condition of one side or the other. What one can do is consciously step back and ask, why isn't one sympathetic to both sides? After all, these are all human beings involved in this turmoil. And that leads to a self-reflective thought where one can ask, what is it in me that is being reflected out there in what is going on? Almost childish way of putting this is to say, if I were king of the world, what kind of tyrant would I be? And then I begin to gain some insight into tyranny. So there's inner work that this outer turmoil immediately suggests to us. The second is remembering that wonderful phrase, to live to benefit mankind is the first step, which to me is a mantra. Means we have to see each human being as a human being. Then we can begin to ask, what are they going through such that they do this? That might give us clues as to what to say. Now, at the very local level, where we're encountering people who are obviously suffering, they're going through divorces, they're hooked on drugs, they're heavens knows what, they're just angry at the world or at their job. Taking this approach, we can then apply it locally. I have to begin by listening to and being sympathetic to the fact that a person is struggling. That does not mean that I have to approve or support what they are doing. But if I can understand, so to use an old 1960s phrase, where they are coming from, I may then be able to, quite impersonally, say things that they find are helpful. And sometimes that is just asking questions like, I can tell you're feeling bad. Why are you feeling this way? And that may give further clues. And what one can do is basically suggest solutions which are kind of applications of the Pāramitās without ever mentioning the Pāramitās.
Okay, thank you. There's a question that links a bit to this last question. When I look at the situation in the world, I wonder what phase we are in as humanity and whether specifically a certain Pāramitā would now come to the fore that could lead to peace.
Well, if we treat, karma is constantly precipitating. But as we have been told, there is individual personal karma, there's individual karma, there is ethnic karma, racial karma, national karma, global karma. And these are likely to travel in cycles because, as, say, take for global karma, as humanity responds to that, it generates more karma, which then comes back. And it appears that we're getting a pretty substantial dish of karma that resulted from humanity's past actions. One suspects the presently incarnated humanity in a previous incarnation had a lot to do with that. So, and what we can do about, I think it begins right with the first Pāramitā. If we look at it not just as giving in some mechanical sense, but as magnanimity, living generously toward others, thinking generously toward others. If a number of us can do that, as the Dalai Lama believes, I think that would have a positive effect, even if we're not in direct contact with those who are so immediately caught up in the turmoil.
Okay, thank you. Those
Yep.
were the questions. And
Okay.
a lot of thank
Good.
yous from the audience.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Elton. We're looking forward, of course, to the next Sunday that we can study this subject and then can also prepare the questions they have for you. And that reminds me of my old school days. I have learned better ask the teacher questions than he start asking questions on me. Yeah? Because then you have more control over the situation. But okay, let's see. So the people are able to digest the video again and come up with some questions or remarks next Sunday evening. Yeah? So we like to thank you. And keep in mind, tomorrow, on the end of the day, our time, Central European time, you can have a look on YouTube and find the lecture uninterrupted, because we are having a good connection with Elton and we are able to record it. Yeah. So thank you again, Elton, and we like to see you next Sunday, and we will maybe share some information for the coming Sunday as well. Yeah. So thank you very much again. Thank all the audience for their patience and standing the temptation of the modern technique, so sensitive for weather conditions, but it is as it is. Yep. So for now, I will close with the Gayatri. Gayatri is using the word golden sun, and you can see that as a symbol. You can see that as a representation of the first proposition of the secret doctrine. You can see that as the monad, as the totality, and listen to the text. O thou, golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds, so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity, which is the heart of the universe, may see the path before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiated light.